After 15 weeks of a devastating military confrontation that paralyzed global shipping, rattled the international energy markets, and brought the Middle East to the brink of a wider regional war, Washington and Tehran now stand on the threshold of a historic yet fragile peace agreement. Brokered through intensive Pakistani mediation, the so-called Trump deal promises to end the U.S. naval blockade, reopen the strategic Strait of Hormuz, and restore a measure of stability to an increasingly volatile global economy. On paper, it appears to be a major diplomatic breakthrough. In reality, its survival may already be in doubt. Even as Washington and Tehran move toward de-escalation, Israeli airstrikes continue to pound Lebanon, threatening to unravel the very framework upon which this agreement rests. The contradiction is striking. While one front moves toward peace, another continues to move toward escalation. The situation raises profound questions about the future of the region and the credibility of American strategy. If the United States seeks stability, why does it appear unable or unwilling to restrain its closest ally? As much of the global South accuses Western powers of applying double standards to international law and regional conflicts, Washington faces growing scrutiny over its priorities and its long-term strategic calculations. Is this agreement the beginning of a new geopolitical reality, or merely a temporary pause in a much wider conflict? These questions and many more are put to our panel on All 24 News Special shortly. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this special coverage on All 24 News with me, Karim Fazakri. And before we dive into our debate, let's take a look at this report.
After months of a conflict that plunged the Middle East into instability and sent shockwaves through global energy markets, Tehran and Washington have finally reached an initial deal that would extend their shaky ceasefire and lead to the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Shortly after arriving in France for the G7 summit, US President Donald Trump announced that the Memorandum of Understanding has already been signed and the strait is already partially opened, with the official signing ceremony set to be held on Friday in Geneva. Algeria on Monday welcomed the agreement, expressing hope that it will serve as a foundation for strengthening trust among the parties concerned.
Algeria welcomes the achievement of framework agreement between the United States of America and Islamic Republic of Iran, under which military operations in the Gulf region and the Middle East will cease. On this occasion, Algeria expresses its sincere appreciation for the international mediation efforts, particularly those undertaken by Pakistan and Qatar, and emphasizes the importance of all parties adhering to the agreed understandings.
From Europe to China, the agreement was met with particular relief as it restores maritime shipping through the Strait of Hormuz after months of turmoil that unsettled global energy markets.
The deal that has been announced now by US and Iran that is much welcomed by everybody. It is the first phase to open the Strait of Hormuz and then move on to the negotiations on the critical topics like the nuclear issue, but also other critical issues that are important for the stability and peace in the region.
China welcomes the agreement reached by the United States and Iran on the content of the first phase Memorandum of Understanding and appreciates Pakistan's mediation effort. The Strait of Hormuz is an important waterway for international navigation. Restoring stability in the strait serves the shared interest of the countries in the region and the international community.
The UN, moreover, called for an immediate end to hostilities and the withdrawal of Zionist occupation forces from the Lebanese territory.
I welcome the announcement that the United States and Iran have agreed on a peace deal that provides for an immediate and permanent ceasefire, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, and a framework for further negotiations. I call for an immediate end to hostilities, the withdrawal of Israel from Lebanese territory.
Eyes are now focused not only on Friday's ceremony, but also on the subsequent 60-day round of negotiations, which will address the most contentious issues, including Iran's nuclear program, and ultimately determine the future of the entire region.
Welcome back. To unpack the legal, geopolitical, and economic dimensions of this crisis, I am joined tonight by a distinguished panel of experts. Ms. Mahsa Safi, political and international relations expert at the Institute for Political and International Studies, IPIS, at the Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She joins us from Tehran. Hello there, ma'am, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. And we're also pleasure to have Professor Annie Pforzheimer, foreign policy analyst and former U.S. diplomat, joining us from New York. She's the author of the recently published and highly debated piece, The Gateway Drug to War in Iran, How America's War on Narco-Terrorism Became a War All Itself. Professor, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have the pleasure to welcome Dr. Hossein Fatni, Professor of Law and Society at the University of Pennsylvania. He joins us from Philadelphia. Good to see you again, Professor.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And we also have the honor to have Mr. Mark William Lowe, Corporate Risk and Geopolitical Analyst. He joins us from Rome. Hello there, Mark, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. All right, let's start the debate with you, Ms. Safi. Tehran has made it explicitly clear that any sustainable ceasefire must include a halt to Israeli aggression in Lebanon. Yet, Israel continues its bombardment of Beirut, explicitly sidelined from this U.S.-Iran agreement. How can Iran trust a signature from Washington when the U.S. seems entirely incapable of reining in its primary regional ally, potentially making this agreement dead on arrival?
It's a really remarkable question. In terms of international relations, what is a guarantee for a country is not the trust or what we call it a reliable agreement, but it is the self-deterrence or power. So in this context, I think what Tehran relies on is its internal power, and in terms of any MOU or any agreements towards this issue, which is making unstable the whole region in global economy, is that's how Tehran could shape its existence and its power towards the region.
Mm-hmm. So you believe that any kind of agreement is needed right now, even if it doesn't include Lebanon? Is that what you're saying?
It is important that how Tehran could return to its power if there is any kind of mutual agreement between Iran and United States, who United States gonna guarantee this ceasefire, and we have witnessed that during this period of ceasefire. Even United States couldn't kind of power to control the whole region. The most closest ally, I mean the Israel army, into this ceasefire. So for Tehran, the only potential who can rely on its own power.
Mm-hmm. It seems we're having a connection issue with you, Ms. Mahsa Safi. Let me have the team call you back. Meanwhile, I turn to Professor Pforzheimer. Professor, if we come to look at your recent publication, you dismantled the legal and moral facade of America's geopolitical posturing. So if we look at the hawkish opposition within the American establishment today, to what extent is the U.S. waging a lost war and sacrificing its own global standing and domestic stability?
Well, thank you for pointing out that really it has been waging a war that doesn't make any sense, and it is a war that absolutely jeopardizes America's international standing. If the U.S. wants to call for adherence to international norms or laws, by other countries. First and foremost, the U.S. must do it itself. And as in my article, the first thing that happened in a way was a test case of the U.S. bombing ships, small boats that were coming towards the U.S. purportedly with drugs, and claiming that that was an anti-terrorism movement which justified lethal force. And honestly, what happened was not enough reaction either within the US or internationally. And some members of this administration were emboldened to say they could go further. And the next step was what they did in Venezuela with the sort of quick invasion and kidnapping of the then president, Maduro, bringing him back to the United States to stand trial. And I believe that those same people were telling the president that this was another example of success and US military force, and all of those international norms didn't matter. And the next thing, as we saw sequentially or chronologically, was the action against Iran. Obviously, nothing about what has happened between the US and Iran and the wider conflict has gone according to somebody's plan, that it should be very quick, that the Iranian government might fall because of the military action against it. Instead, what you have is the US engaging in even more illegal activities, such as indiscriminate acts of violence against civilians, against shipping, against the wider economy, and even at some points making claims that certain types of bombing or other military actions would be taken that would destroy a civilization, which in essence is the international definition of, terrorist speech. So in general, the US has acted in ways that do not bring it any kind of benefit internationally in terms of the rule of law or its reputation. And then, of course, the logistics of the war, the impact on the US economy. I know we're going to talk a little more about that.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And since you spoke about the collapse of the rules-based order, let me include Dr. Fatni here. Dr. Fatni, the international community is witnessing a breathtaking display of hypocrisy. Washington imposed a naval blockade to collectively punish an entire nation, yet it shields Israel from any legal accountability for its relentless strikes on Lebanese civilian infrastructure. And we can even mention the genocide in Gaza before. So has the international law simply become a weaponized tool of Western geopolitical convenience, devoid of any real legitimacy in the eyes of the global South?
Excuse me. There is no question that imposing a naval blockade on Iran or on any nation is considered to be legal based on the laws of war. Belligerent states can do that. However, also belligerent states under the laws of war are supposed to not inflict pain and inflict harm on civilians. It's in that context what's really what happened in Gaza and what's happening now in Lebanon is in total violation of international law. But unfortunately, as we all know, and in this context, international law, and especially this part of international law, humanitarian law, the international human rights, are very, very politicized aspects of international law. And international law in general has been very criticized by the global South, as it is perceived to be basically a Western law. It is a law that is really made by the West for the interest of the West. It's in that context that the global South, since the early 60s, had adopted an initiative to ask for a change in some of the principles of international, especially the international economic law. As a matter of fact, it was the late Algerian president, the former Algerian president, Houari Boumediene, who came to the United Nations in 1974 on behalf of the Group of 77 to demand for the so-called NIEO, a new international economic order, which we know until today is just ink on paper. So there is really no question that when we really look at what's happening today in terms of what's going on in Lebanon, what's really happening in Gaza, and the perspective that the United States has by imposing a naval blockade on Iran, by punishing the whole Iranian community. What's happening, for instance, what Israel is doing, the punishment of the Lebanese, the violations of the Fourth Geneva Convention of what happened in Gaza. Now you expect a country like the United States, who really believes in the rule, or supposed to believe in the rule of law, supposed to believe in human rights and all that, to argue on behalf of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which basically addresses the rights of civilians. But unfortunately, this is a reality. International law in this area is really about geopolitical interest. And the United States, especially under this administration, has its own geopolitical interest. And unfortunately, this is a reality. And that's why, as my colleague said, this war really has not achieved nothing, really. We are back to where we were before, the pre-Hormuz war, pre-Iranian war. What are the achievements? Except the losses, there are really no achievement to this war.
Amazing, Dr. Fatni. And since you mentioned the geopolitical interest here, let me turn to Mr. Mark William Lowe. Mr. Mark, while the U.S. exhausts its military and diplomatic capital in a 15-week Middle Eastern war, Beijing is watching closely. How has this conflict or this war and the resulting weaponization of the Strait of Hormuz actually accelerated China's influence over the global energy market and exposed the strategic vulnerability of the West?
Very good questions indeed. Thank you. So, where to begin? I think first and foremost, it's important to say that China has learned at least two very important lessons from this crisis. The first is the fact that the West basically remains extraordinarily vulnerable to disruptions of a small number of strategic checkpoints. And in this case, it's a geographic choke point. It's a narrow stretch of water in the Gulf. And by closing it, the impact was in energy markets, shipping costs, insurance premiums, also business confidence across the entire world. Now, basically, the closure of the straits has reminded the world that in many ways globalization is still dependent on and determined by geography. But let's also remember that the geographic choke points are not the only choke points that exist. We have economic choke points, we have political choke points. But for today, let's limit ourselves to the geographic choke point in question. So moving on, the second lesson that China has learned is that they can point to this crisis. I think this is really important. They can point to this crisis and say, basically, that this is what happens when global energy security, to make one example, remains so heavily dependent on American political and military decisions and the instability in the Middle East. So China has learned a lot from this. However, we should be very careful not to exaggerate any advantage on China's part. Let's remember that China is and remains an important importer of Gulf energy. So any prolonged disruption in Hormuz will damage the Chinese economy very, very seriously as well. So in conclusion, what does Beijing gain from this crisis? What it gains is influence, not control or anything similar. China, I think, gains a lot of influence. It's not the real winner. There are no winners in a war, but it's a concept here that's a winner, if you like. It's the fact that it's this China's argument. It's this Chinese narrative. I mean, what Beijing has spent years telling countries in Asia, America, Latin America, basically that excessive dependence on Western systems creates risk. And this crisis has done nothing other than make this Chinese narrative considerably more persuasive. So if anything, this is China's biggest gain.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Now, let me turn to Ms. Safi. The fact that Islamabad and Doha succeeded where traditional Western diplomatic channels failed actually speaks volumes. So this leads me to this question. Does this Pakistani mediation signal some kind of a shift where the global South is actively bypassing Western-dominated diplomacy to secure its own regional stability? How would you read this?
Of course, it's a moment that we can witnessing that what we call it before, that the transitional global order that is happening right now in recent period of international relations. And now we can see that instead of the step of Western allies, traditional allies of Middle East states, now we can see that the whole parties in the region are trying to make their own significant role, make their own game, and even the traditional the background and influence of Western-centric, what we called it before, it's has been ended right now. And even in terms of resuming Iran and Saudi Arabia ties, China has participated and was the mediator in that issue. And now even Europeans who are the NATO allies and close allies to the United States didn't do any significant role and didn't participate in that crisis, but they just came with some declarations. Even they didn't condemn any aggressions and just waited and see what is going on. And they just raised that we gotta participate in any ongoing managing this or controlling this crisis. But the whole regional countries are making their own steps. And now we are witnessing that the whole, what you call it, global South or multipolar global order, it is becoming to happen.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Now let me bring Professor Pforzheimer. Professor, President Donald Trump is touting the deal or this deal as a massive victory. Yet, the US Congress, for example, is fiercely divided, with many hardliners demanding no concessions to Tehran at all. So when we come to hear about the promise of lifting sanctions, how realistic is this of lifting the sanctions and freezing Iranian assets when domestic US politics are so fundamentally toxic and adversarial toward any diplomatic compromise?
Thank you. I think that American politics is indeed the place to start, and I would have to wager that although people will not like the deal when they get to know it better, they will understand that this has been an extremely foolish and expensive way to get the exact same terms that this president rejected earlier. He will still be able to pull it off because he has his party completely under his control, and they, for the time being, have the Congress under control. I think it's important, even though this is, of course, an international issue, I would draw attention to American electoral calendars. In November, the midterm elections are really getting all the attention here in the US. The president's approval ratings are very low. The fact of this war, for many reasons, I won't even elaborate here, you know it, even his own supporters don't like it, and the cost of gas has gone up considerably. He's under a lot of political pressure to bring it to a close. So I think that political pressure is stronger than the pressure that might come from those who think it's a bad deal. Conservatively, the war has cost the U.S. directly about $50 billion with a B dollars, and then another $50 billion or so in extra energy costs to American taxpayers. So I think there's sort of a need to get out of it. And there will be a lot of effort to spin everything that's happening as somehow better than the deal that the previous president got. That's factually incorrect, but that really hasn't stopped any of them so far. So I do think that diplomacy could have delivered the same deal for $0, but instead, apparently, they needed to send $100 billion of my taxpayer dollars on essentially a very flawed outcome.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And speaking of, flaws, let's speak about economy now. And I turn to you, Dr. Hussein Fetni, especially when we come to see the legal aspect of it. So legal scholars across the global south in general argue that the freezing of billions of dollars in sovereign assets and the enforcement of naval blockades amount to economic terrorism. So what precedent, I'm saying, does this US-led economic warfare set for the future of international relations? And can the global financial system survive this level of weaponization, especially if we come to compare with the war in Ukraine and how Russia found a way to work around the sanctions and find some alternatives?
Well, again, talking about imposing naval blockade and freezing assets. Look, the preamble to the United Nations Charter emphasized that nation, if they have disputes, they should use peaceful means to settle disputes. So there is no question that nations are under the obligation to use peaceful means. And as my colleague mentioned, this conflict between Iran and the US could really have been settled through peaceful means. Going back and talking about the war between the US and Iran, it hasn't really settled it hasn't really achieved anything. It took us to the pre-war status. Now, in terms of the can it be used? What are the effects and the impacts? Definitely from the global south, you're really talking about the impact that the global economy has suffered, especially many of these poor nations, as a result of the naval blockade as a result of, look at the Iranian people, for instance, again, talking about the people of Iran. We talk also about the people around the globe, even here in the United States, that the decision taken by leadership can really trickle down to the average person. It's in that context when we really look at this decision made by the leadership end up really hurting and harming the average person. Yes, the global south, we talk also about the average person. It's in that context when we really look at some of these measures, we can say, yes, you can really look at them and you say they are much better than the use of force and all that. But then you have to really look at the context. Were they really used in the appropriate context? No, in this case, because they're really causing havoc in terms of the international economy. They're causing havoc here in the United States. And now, as my colleague mentioned, that when we really look at Congress now, not only Congress that is really was against the war, now they're even insisting that any agreement has to be basically approved by Congress. So the global south definitely is not really happy with this war. The consequences of this war will be felt for a long time to go, for a long time to come. And things are not really going to be settled with the end of this war. It's going to take months and months. It's going to even be after the election. It's going to really take time for the market to settle and all that. So there are definitely problems. As to now, when we really talk about terrorism, economic terrorism, I think the word terrorism means many things to many people, you know. When we really talk about terrorism, we can really look at what's really happening in Gaza, what's really happening in Lebanon. When you really have people really being slaughtered, whether you talk about Gaza, whether you talk about Lebanon, you're really talking about state terrorism. So it's really definition of terrorism. It's all really who's really defining it. It's really more about the politics and the definition. What is really terrorism for one may be an act of liberation for someone else. So these are the kind of things that are very politicized. It means different things to different governments, different people. Again, it's really about politics of it. So.
Thank you, Dr. Fatni. Now let me turn to Mr. Mark William Lowe. Mr. Mark William Lowe, as you were listening, I was asking Dr. Fatni about this economic warfare and how it affects, future international relations. And I asked also a question that puts the finger on global financial system and how it can survive when it is used as a weapon. But then that's not the only thing that is used as a weapon. Even the Strait of Hormuz. So the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz is supposed to be the immediate relief the world needs. But we can see that the harm is already done. The damage to the global supply chain, for example. How are Europe and the broader global economy reassessing their extreme vulnerability, at this level of weaponization, and also to U.S. adventurism in the Gulf, if we come to speak about what's happening right now?
Okay. If I may, can I say something before I begin?
Sure.
Answering your question? First and foremost, my observation is the following. I mean, this presumed, so I use the conditional, presumed memorandum may or may not lead to some form of agreement. But in any case, the root causes of the problems that brought all of this about will not be addressed. Never mind resolved. They simply won't even be addressed. So all of this is absolute madness. And your use of the word adventurism would seem very, very, very appropriate, because adventurism has, by definition, some element of madness to it. Let's go on an adventure. Let's see what happens. An adventure is something in which you have to deal with the consequences that you haven't thought through. And this is exactly what we're seeing. If we get a memorandum together, if the memorandum reaches any form of stable agreement, if said agreement actually exists, where are we? Well, we're no further forward. We are absolutely no further forward than we were at the beginning of this ridiculous and absolutely unnecessary conflict that has caused enormous harm at a global level. Now, going back to all of that, what happens if we manage to reopen the Straits of Hormuz? Well, I mean, obviously that would be very, very welcome, but let's also remember, going back to what I just said, let's also remember the opening a waterway is absolutely not the same thing as restoring confidence. I think it has escaped the attention of a great number of people in the White House and in other parts of the American administration that there is no confidence in the United States of America anymore. So it's going to be very, very hard once the current occupant of the Oval Office has gone off to play golf in Florida or whatever he will do when he leaves the Oval Office. It's going to be very, very difficult for the next occupant to restore any confidence in the United States of America. And this is, apart from the fact that it's very, very sad, it's also a huge problem for everybody, basically. Anyway, getting back, the disruption has always taken, the disruption is in front of our eyes. It's already taken place. Shipping routes were basically closed down. So energy prices have gone up. Businesses are starting to look much closer at how they can deal with future uncertainty. Even if the straits are open tomorrow morning, by some miracle, things begin to go back to normal, because any return to normality will take months. It's not a case of saying, okay, we've cleared all the mines, we've opened the straits, back to normal, boys and girls. That's going to take a long time. A long, long time. So there is no tomorrow morning effect at all. Mm-hmm. But just closing, basically, opening the straits, yes, will slowly restore traffic, but it's not going to restore trust. For Europe, this is a reminder of a reality that it has faced for Europe politically, and also for Europe in terms of private corporations, for private companies, etc. Mm-hmm. This is a reality that we've faced on more than one occasion that we have never learned from. Basically, a crisis that happens thousands of kilometers away can impact our interests immediately, affect inflation, industrial competitiveness. By definition, inflation, your competitiveness drops immediately. It will impact investment decisions, and going back to the electorate, household bills, prices at the petrol pump, etc., etc. So the lesson is bigger, really, than current American policy. The real issue here for Europe is strategic exposure. Mm-hmm. Europe remains vulnerable to any number of shocks that can basically originate elsewhere, very, very far away, but they create immediate economic impacts inside Europe. So last thing, then I'll stop. But I mean, really, if we think about it, after the pandemic, after the invasion of the Ukraine, now the crisis in Hormuz, every single European leader and the European Union as a whole really do need to all sit down and ask themselves the very, very same question. And it is, how can we build an economy that is less vulnerable to crises that we do not control and we will never have any control of at all? So the discussion is certainly, it's not academic, it's not theoretical at all. It's an economic necessity.
Amazing. And now let me bring back Ms. Safi. Ms. Safi, if the Strait of Hormuz is reopened and the naval blockades are lifted, what does a strategic victory look like for Tehran, according to you? Is Iran's ultimate goal to secure permanent sanctions relief? Or has the real victory been proven that it can unilaterally dictate the terms of global energy security when provoked? Or what is it really?
I think the main issue before that war, it was not the blockade or any strain in the Strait of Hormuz, but it was the existence or what United States called the threat of Iran, and the aim of that war, I think it is outer to another issue, which is the importance of the Strait of Hormuz. And during this war, what Iran wanted from
again, another.
The transition. Do you hear me?
Yeah. There were some cuts.
In terms of Hormuz, what was important for Iran, it was to reinform that its existence and its geopolitics and its power in the region, and showing that the importance of Strait of Hormuz and how can they manage and control of the strait. And it is even if the transition in the strait is becoming back to a status quo, what was before the war, Iran does not lose its power or sovereignty. And even United States will not win anything, but the control of Iran and the existence will be exist there, will remain there. In terms of any achievement after any MOU or agreements, we have to wait for the Friday and for any 60 days or more. I think what is more important for Iran for writing and having diplomatically more than military posture to find any agreement that return its rights and its interest back to the state. I think it is important for Iran to, in terms of sanctions and lifting them, or any treaty that can lead to relief to the people would be important more.
Point is clear. So technically, a victory for Iran pretty much looks or sets in its survival, and also in getting some relief for the people, and releasing of their assets. Very nice. Now, Professor Pforzheimer, a very quick round of questions with you and the remaining guests, please. Professor Annie Pforzheimer, we see a stark contrast. If, for example, the situation deteriorates in the Middle East, it wouldn't be in the interest of Washington in any means whatsoever. This is what most analysts are saying. So especially that Washington is looking for an exit strategy ahead of the midterms election. How would you read this?
Oh, I agree with that entirely. And what has happened in terms of the wider war, Israeli actions in Lebanon, for example, that have really gone against any, has gone against many aspects of international law, but also against the sort of political and tactical interests of the president of the United States. And it feels uncontrollable. It feels like they set something in motion, as one of the other speakers said, that they just sort of said, oh, I wonder how this will work. There is a reason why this hasn't been tried. For 30 years that I was a diplomat and our relationship with Iran wasn't good, we didn't do this because we actually knew, there were experts who knew, that once you started some of these actions, it would be impossible to quickly, for example, turn the economy back on, or it would be impossible to stop certain countries from exacting a price on other countries. So even though the idea of the U.S. wanting an exit strategy, the U.S. having some control over Israel, that's all true. There's an element of this that is beyond the control that I can see of this administration, and they should have known that before they started what they started. And so it was badly understood. The implications are incredibly serious. And at this point, hopefully the political pressure, the domestic political pressure, maybe international pressure, is going to do its work and is going to step by step force the administration back, and this is embarrassing, right, to the position it was in before all this conflict started. And many, many billions of dollars later, they will have to turn to diplomacy to achieve their goals.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Professor. And now, Dr. Fatni, very quickly, as Professor was saying now, the situation in Lebanon is one of many other issues that actually work against the interest of the U.S. administration. We can see that Israeli forces are pushing deeper into Lebanon amid these very peace talks. So the silence from Western capitals regarding human rights violations is deafening as well. And I asked you about the double standards before, and technically, are we witnessing a tacit agreement by the West to rewrite the Geneva Conventions, where the rules of war only apply to their adversaries and never to their allies, for example?
Well, yeah, unfortunately, what we, as we spoke throughout this session, what's happening in Lebanon, what's happening in Gaza is unacceptable. It's in total violation of human rights, the International Bill of Human Rights, and makes people around the globe really question the whole body of the International Law of Human Rights, and really question the United States, question democracy, question the rule of law, and rightly so. And because the whole system is really based on shame, and I think it's really difficult now for the United States as a superpower, and especially the United States, who's supposed to be really totally different from Russia, totally different from China, because it's the country that's supposed to promote human rights, the rule of law, and all that, and is really involved in a conflict where there are so many violations of human rights, and has an actor who the US is supporting and is committing these violations. So I think it really diminishes from the role of the United States as a global player. And it diminishes from the power that the United States has in terms of international perception globally, in terms of international relations, which really damages the image that the global society has about the United States.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Professor Fatni. And very quickly, Mr. Maklau, I know it's difficult to do it in 1 minute, but then I trust you. The BRICS, for example, the BRICS nations and the broader global South have observed this crisis with alarm. So will the fragility of this US-led system and the freezing of Iranian assets, and before it the Russian one, serve as the ultimate catalyst for an accelerated de-dollarization of global energy, for example?
Okay. The crisis certainly strengthens the case for de-dollarization, but that doesn't mean that any replacement of the dollar is around the corner. Certainly not. There are a great many concerns indeed, but the dollar will continue to remain dominant because it's supported by financial markets, liquidity, legal protections, and until now, decades of trust. A lot of that trust has been undermined, but that's another issue. So I wouldn't expect any dramatic collapse of the dollar system, but I would see an ever greater shift towards the concept of diversification, greater use of local currencies and regional trade, etc. But so to conclude, maybe we can turn this around. To conclude, I think the question is that it's no longer a question of do countries trust the dollar. The question today is, are countries continuing to be comfortable depending on it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we run out of time and we have to leave it there. I would like to extend my deepest thanks to our guests for their profound insights tonight. Masa Safi in Tehran, Professor Annie Pforzheimer in New York, Dr. Hossein Fatni in Philadelphia, and Mr. Mark William Lowe in Rome. Thank you all. And ladies and gentlemen, with this we come to a close. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, have a good one.